have to be very careful what we say now that we're being recorded. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our exploration of the practice of shamatha vipassana using the book of that name by B. Alan Wallace and Eva Natanya. And tonight we dive into our second of a number of different traditions covered in this book, the Sakya tradition. So let's start with our usual chants. I think everybody knows them here. In order to let all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all are steps on the path of omniscience. May this arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this. So Manjushri factors large in tonight's material, right? So actually, before we dive into the tradition of the Buddhist masters who live in a place where there's pale earth, known as the Sakya, for the name of that place, the pale earth place. Let's take a quick look at the last of the texts in this volume from the Atisha, the tradition of mind training of Atisha, the Kadam tradition, which is on page 67, we didn't get to last time. I don't think so. The 8-verse mind training, or the 8 verses of mind training by Geshe Langwe Tongpa Dorje Sangye Vajralayan. So I think I mentioned last week that this is the other of the main texts on mind training that come down to us from the tradition of Kadam and Atisha and his student Dromtung. And instead of 59 slogans, this has only 8 verses and sums up the attitude of a bodhisattva, or the aspirational attitude of a bodhisattva, quite succinctly, powerfully, and in a challenging way indeed. So with the resolve to accomplish the highest welfare for all sentient beings who surpass even a wish-fulfilling jewel, may I always hold them dear. What does he refer to all sentient beings as surpassing even a wish-fulfilling jewel?
That's how precious human life is?
That's how precious human life. All sentient beings. Because all sentient beings are the source or the referent upon which we cultivate bodhicitta. And therefore they grant us the ability to cultivate bodhicitta. Without other sentient beings, we cannot cultivate bodhicitta. We cannot cultivate supreme enlightenment of a Buddha with the perfection of the 2 accumulations of merit and wisdom if there were no other sentient beings to be recipients of our generosity, to challenge our discipline, to strain our patience, to incite our exertion, to be the referent for our meditation, and for being the absence of referent for our understanding of emptiness. So we always hold them dear instead of like other people are such a pain. But it's just a very common point of view towards other sentient beings. We hold them as dearer than oneself in this mind training tradition because they give us the capability of practicing to become a Buddha. Whenever I associate with anyone, may I regard myself as the lowest among all and cherish them as supreme from the very depths of my heart. Imagine that, like you go into a meeting at work, or you have a big family gathering, or you're on a subway, or you're in a crowded Grand Central, or on the streets of New York, or on the road, people whizzing by you, cutting you off, and all you can think about is that I'm the lowest of all these sentient beings. Gulp. In all activities, may I examine my mind stream, and as soon as mental affliction arises, since it is malignant for myself and others, may I forcefully turn away from it. This is a theme that becomes very common in certain traditions as a way of viewing the afflictions as a disease, as a cancer. Not like, something I'm struggling with, but like something that's attacking me, something that's not inherently me, and that is ravishing my body, speech, and mind. And I need to find a remedy for that. I need to dispel this from my being. When I encounter sentient beings of a miserable nature, seeing that they are oppressed by strong vices and misery, may I cherish these beings so difficult to find, as if I had found a precious treasure. Similar to the way Letitia brought along Bengalese tea boy to Tibet so that he would have somebody to irritate him and challenge his patience and composure. We cherish those who are difficult to deal with, the problematic people that we tend to avoid, the weirdos, the rude people, the obnoxious people, the bullies, the racists. We cherish them because they allow us to practice the perfections. That's sort of a bizarre attitude. And it really challenges, like, well, so do we tolerate those people? Do we help them to become better people? Do we try to change them? And that is a huge quandary with this whole Bodhisattva attitude is, well, okay, so I'm cultivating all these collections of merit in myself, but what about these other people who are accumulating negative karma? What about them? Are we helping them by accommodating their aggression or their attachment and so forth? When others out of envy treat me unreasonably with abuse, slander, and the like, may I accept defeat and offer the victory to them. So that's like being turned on by one's partners and having to bear the blame and all the culpability for some unlawful activity and being sentenced to jail for 40 years while your partners go free. Imagine how you would feel about those people for 40 years locked up, losing 40 years from your life in that way, or spending 40 years. And so here this bizarre attitude of cherishing those who defeat us, who abuse, slander, and treat us unreasonably. Even when one to whom I had brought benefit and in whom I had great hopes, without any reason harms me, may I regard that person as my sublime spiritual friend. perverse attitude of sort of sadism, masochism, of like just bringing all defeat and suffering upon myself, and victory and gain to others, and regarding those who inflict injury upon us as our spiritual friend. What a bizarre term that is. In short, may I directly and indirectly offer benefit and happiness to all my mothers. All my mothers, meaning all sentient beings who have been my mother. Throughout, at one time or another, all sentient beings have been my mother. Throughout limitless rebirths up until today. May I secretly take upon myself all their harm and suffering. May all this be undefiled by the conceptual stains of the 8 mundane concerns, and by recognizing all phenomena as illusions, without clinging, may we be freed from bondage. So may I have this attitude, may I be able to have this attitude without the stains of the 8 worldly dharmas, praise and blame, loss and gain, and so forth, and recognizing all phenomena as empty, without intrinsic reality. So, quite a difficult task. So let's turn to the Sakya tradition, the words of Manjushri, Sakya Pith Instructions to Transform One's Life, on page 69. It's an illustrious lineage whose 11th century founder, Koncha Gyalpo. So GY is sometimes pronounced Gyalpo in Lhasa dialect, and Gyalpo in the G becomes like a J in Eastern Tibet. And so our teacher, because our teacher was from Eastern Tibet, many others in our tradition will tend to pronounce that as Gyalpo as opposed to Gyalpo. He was a member of the ancient Kon clan, which is not the same as the Jewish Kon clan. But they do have Kon heads, similarly, which is understood to have descended from celestial deities during the time of the time of the Tibetan Empire. The Tibetan Empire refers to the time of King Trisong Detsen, the famous king who invited Padmasambhava and Shantarakshita to Tibet. And it's called the Tibetan Empire because at that time Tibet had defeated China and Nepal and Bhutan and northern India, and was like the head of that region, or at least western India, western China. Koncho Gyalpo's recorded ancestors include a minister of the 8th century Tibetan king Trisong Detsen and a brother who was one of the first 7 monks ordained under Shantarakshita. I guess that minister's brother was one of the 7 monks. So Shantarakshita, when he was invited and came to Tibet upon the invitation of Trisong Detsen, said, let's see if Tibetans can become monks successfully. And they chose 7 young boys as being eminent examples, or candidates rather, for becoming a monk. And he worked with them, and they succeeded. The rest is history, as they say. They also did the same with translators. And some of the monks some individuals were in both groups, monks and translators. So he trained 7 translators early on, and we see those translators as the translator for many, many of the sutras and tantras that were translated during that early period, known as the first transmission, or the first wave, or the first cycle of transmission of Buddhism into Tibet. The Kon family thus held and had maintained many of the secret Vajrayana rites passed down from the time that Padmasambhava had granted empowerments in the Tibetan imperial court. So Padmasambhava did not teach Vajrayana teachings widely throughout Tibet. He mostly taught in a smaller inner group of the king's ministers, the king's family, the other members of royalty and nobility at that time. And then he planted all of the treasure texts. He spent most of his time going around Tibet planting treasure texts with his director of Terma, Yeshe Tsogyal, who recorded what was planted where and who would receive it, when and why and how. And so there's these two streams of teachings from Padmasambhava, the Terma tradition, and then the spoken tradition, which is known as the Kama, Ka being voice or sound or word, Kama tradition. And that tradition comes down, parts of that tradition come down into the Sakya lineage, the Kon family. But by the 11th century, after the collapse of the Tibetan Empire, so by this time, Tibet has gone through what's known as the persecution by the so-called evil king, Long Dharma, who decides that the importation of Buddhism is a mistake and not what he and many others wanted. They wanted to still practice and hold as supreme the Bun tradition, the native indigenous tradition of religion in Tibet. And they kill and destroy most of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition at that time, sometime in the 10th or 11th century, probably 10th century. And the Dharma gradually comes back. And during that time that it comes back, it's said that the Dharma becomes practiced in a somewhat perverse way, where secret teachings of Vajrayana are practiced and taught openly without restriction. Interesting concept that they make that comment about Vajrayana teachings, and that a lot of the practitioners, the tantrikas, were practicing rituals for material gain. So it was felt that there was a lot of corruption of the tradition during the early time of that second wave of Buddhism in Tibet. So by the 11th century, after the collapse of the Tibetan Empire, along with the demise of Long Dharma, the evil king, and the ensuing period of fragmentation, so he is killed by Pelki Dorje, which was apparently one of the 25 disciples of Padmasambhava, in a prior incarnation of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And at that point, the empire collapses. Their hold on all these neighboring regions by the Tibetans collapses. And Tibet and the other regions fragment into smaller regions, regional control or rule. Some of the Nyingma traditions have been weakened or become corrupt, dismayed by witnessing the public display of rituals meant to be kept strictly private. Kon Kuchuk Jelpo set out to study first the Hevajra tantric cycle, and later the Chakra Sambra and Guhya Samaja cycles. So these three are what are called, known as later tantric cycles. They're common to the later transmission of Buddhism from India to Tibet. Brought by masters such as Marpa, who brought in particular the Hevajra and the Chakra Sambra, and then Varupa and his teacher Dombipa, which are the predecessors of the Sakya tradition. So he studies these cycles with esteemed translators who were newly importing lineages of Indian Vajrayana to Tibet, presumably the individuals I just mentioned, Dombipa, Varupa, Marpa, and so forth. In 1073, Konchak Jelpa founded Sakya Monastery in a valley known for its extraordinary geographical features, including pale gray earth, the meaning of the Tibetan word Sakya. So it has no relation to Shakya, as in Shakyamuni Buddha, totally separate word. which Jowo is honorific used for Atisha, had visited a few decades earlier. There, Atisha had made prostrations, offerings before a vision of sacred syllables, and explained, this is the sign of the future one emanation of Avalokiteshvara, 7 emanations of Manjushri, and 1 emanation of Vajrapani will come to this place. And that from that time forward, emanations of these 3 enlightened beings will come in an unbroken stream and work for the sake of living creatures. So he places that order for takeout. I'll have 1 Avalokiteshvara, 7 Manjushris, and 1 Vajrapani, and sets that wheel in motion. And these are the incarnations of the major lineage holders of the Sakya. It was Kon Kunchik Jelpo's son, Sachin Kunganingpo, was regarded by the Sakya Buddha as an emanation of Avalokiteshvara, Arya. As a boy, he received early training from his father, who passed away when he was just 10. So his dad is teaching him Buddhism from a very early age. He continues training both Sutra and Tantra under the great translator Bari Lotsawa, and at the age of 12, entered an intensive retreat to meditate on the deity Manjushri, the embodiment of the wisdom of all Buddhas. So 12 is like 7th grade in our scheme of schooling. That's a good time to go on a 4-year solitary retreat. While sitting in a cave at Sakya, reciting Manjushri's Arapatsana mantra, famously the mantra of Manjushri Arapatsana, the boy experienced some disturbing visions, which appeared sometimes in the form of a man made of conch shells, and at other times in the form of a great lion. Interesting visions. When he shares this with his teacher, Bari Lotsawa, he is told that there was a harmful spirit trying to obstruct his practice, and that he could dispel these interferences by meditating on Akshobhya. He then receives the appropriate teachings, permission to practice, and the method for blessing water with the power to protect. By putting these into practice, the obstacles are dispelled or disappeared. Manjushri then appears to him as body, the color of pure gold, one hand displaying the mudra of turning the wheel of Dharma, the teaching mudra, presumably the right hand, while sitting in the lotus posture on a precious throne. To Manjushri's side appeared his companions, the golden-colored bodhisattvas Akshayamati and Pratibhanakutta. Akshayamati is the main character of a very famous sutra of the second turning that has within it a description of the scheme of the turnings of the wheel of the Dharma. There's 2 sutras that present that. Samdhina Mochana famously presents the 3, and this one presents them in a different way. It was at this moment that the divine being appearing before him, spoke the verses of Sachin Kunganingpo that are translated below as the famous text parting from the 4 types of clinging. He went on to become an incomparable master of many lineages of Sutra and Tantra that would form the bedrock of the Sakya tradition, especially of the oral tradition called Lamdre, which means path, Lam, and its fruition, Dre. And that's the name of their tradition of Vajrayana, or like 3-yana path. What we would call the 3-yana path, they would call the Lamdre path and fruit tradition, and it spans from beginner to the highest stages of Tantra. And this tradition stems from the Indian Mahasiddha Virupa. And let's see. Nevertheless, the 4 lines spoken to the young Sachin by Manjushri, also known as Manjughosha, continue to form the core Pith Instructions for Sakya teachings on the steps of the non-tantric Mahayana, for which innumerable commentaries have been taught over the centuries. Following the root verses spoken to Sachin Kunganingpo include a brief and authoritative commentary by the most renowned of the early Sakya masters, Sakya Pandita Kumbhi Gyaltsen, the famous Sakya Pandita, famous for having criticized the Kagyu Mahamudra practitioners and teachings of Mahamudra. And so therefore, when you read books like texts like the Moonbeams of Mahabhuja by Dakotoshi Namgyal, he refers to Sakya Pandita over and over again, usually without naming it, by saying a certain individual has said that our tradition has these problems. This is Sakya Pandita famously made these apparently denigrating comments towards the Kagyu Mahamudra practitioners and teachings. Sakya Pandita was Sachin Kungan Ningpo's grandson, was trained closely by his uncle, Jetsundrapa Jeltsin. Sakya Pandita was a child prodigy, like Sachin Kungan Ningpo, displaying the ability to speak Sanskrit while still a toddler. Imagine that. And memorizing key texts of the Hivaja cycle by the age of 10. In addition to his vast knowledge of Dharma, he became a master of medicine, the arts of various languages, as well as being a superlative logician, which is one of his most outstanding achievements that he is known for, his text and presentation on logic, Buddhist logic, but also, as it says here, medicine, arts, and language. And he wrote a number of treatises on medicine and art. Thus, and music also. And there's a translation of a text by him on music and chanting that's come out recently. Thus, he earned the title of Mahapandita in a way, was able to recite a text in Sanskrit that he had just heard from the Kashmiri Mahapanditas Shakya Sri Bhadra, while having the same text only in Tibetan in front of him. So he receives teachings on this text once with the Tibetan translation of it in front of him, and then recites it in Sanskrit, able to translate it back into Sanskrit instantaneously. He becomes renowned for his writings in the field of valid cognition or logic. Valid cognition being a translation of pramana, which includes the use of logic, the middle way, madhyamaka, and the three sets of vows, which is a famous topic in Tibetan Buddhism, is sort of how to synchronize and coordinate the different views and practices put forward by the three vows, which are the pratimoksha vow, individual liberation, or the monk's vows, the bodhisattva vows, and the pratimoksha vows includes the 5 or 10 precepts, but has all the other monks' rules within it in its full form. And then the Bodhisattva vow, and there's a whole series of 18 downfalls and 46 downfalls, and various lists of practices of Bodhisattvas, some of which we receive in our tradition. And then there's the Tantric vows of Samaya. And the Tantric vows in Samaya violate the Pratimoksha vows in many ways, encouraging one to kill and steal and do other such things. And so how does one understand these vows? Do they contradict each other? And a big theme in Tibetan Buddhism is not to find any of the Buddhist teachings contradictory, but to establish them as appropriate to different stages of the path, or different modes of engaging in the path, such as a monk versus a householder. So many texts on how to practice the three vows in harmony without them being in contradiction with each other. Let's see, linguistics and Tantra. Over time, he's recognized as an actual embodiment of Manjushri. Manjushri, thus revealing himself as one of the 7 emanations of Manjushri, prophesied by Atisha to appear in the land of Sakya, as written by Sheriff Jeltsin Vipas, who is, I think, a contemporary Sakya teacher. When the great being Kungan Jeltsin translated his treatise, The Treasure of Knowledge Concerning Ideal Cognition, into Sanskrit, so he writes this text on logic in Tibetan and then translates it back, or not back, but into Sanskrit. Its fame spread throughout eastern, western, and central India. So it's held on a similar level of regard as the texts of Dignaga and Dharma Kirti, at least in the Sakya tradition, but generally throughout Tibetan Buddhism. At that time, several non-Buddhist pandits, including Harinanda, came to debate within the town of Kirong in the western Tibetan region of Mongolia. For 13 days they debated, but as a result of non-Buddhists lost. Then Harinanda lowered Manjushri Pierre by the right shoulder. Sakyapanda said the Pandit, "It was not you that I could not defeat, but rather the orange bean with the sword by your right shoulder." It's amazing that he was able to see him, right? It's because of him that you won and I was defeated. You have won in terms of debate, but now let us compete in supernatural, normal powers. And we've heard this story like over and over and over again, right? These debates. And so he flies into the sky, and then Sakyapandita claps his hands, and Harinanda falls to the earth, bangs his head, and breaks his nose, and he's got blood gushing from his nose. He's really bummed out. But he recovers and he cuts off his long hair, takes the vows of a Buddhist monk, and served the Buddha Dharma. The well-known statue of the deity, as he appeared at that time, called Manjushri, the Victorian debate, is found today in the Lachen Temple. At the age of 63, Sakyapandita was invited to the royal camp of the Mongolian prince Godin Khan. This is a really cool part of the story, is that the Mongols, headed up by Genghis Khan, the famous Genghis Khan, conquered more of the planet Earth's land than any other person in history. And he had 4 sons, and he sent them into the 4 directions, sort of, to go out and conquer more lands. And his son Godin Khan, he was sent to the south from Mongolia, and he went towards Tibet. And the deal with Genghis Khan and his sons was that they would start off, they would approach a country and they would massacre everybody in a couple of towns, including women, children, and animals. And then they would issue a message to the ruler saying, either you surrender and pay tribute and become part of us, or you suffer this fate throughout the remainder of your country. And Tibet, I think, very quickly acquiesced, very smartly. I'm not sure if they suffered that initial period of slaughter, because basically Tibet at this time really had no unified government nor army, because they were still in that fractured state. And the Godin Khan issues this statement saying, "Send me one representative." And somehow they did manage to come together and choose Sakyapandita to represent Tibet. And, you know, he's not a military leader, he wasn't a political leader, he was a great Buddhist scholar, master. And that's who they send to meet the Godin Khan, which turned out to be an incredibly wise choice, because Godin Khan is immediately taken by Sakyapandita and becomes his student, and renounces to some extent some of his evil habits, let's say. He was the overlord of the regions of Mongolia and Empire bordering on Tibet at that time. Godin Khan sought a spiritual guide, and Sakyapandita remained the regional Mongolian court from 1246 until he passed away. So Sakyapandita went and stayed in the Mongol court of Godin Khan. Amid miraculous signs in 1251, his influence there would contribute significantly to the lasting establishment of Buddhism eventually in Mongolia, because Godin Khan embraced the religion, and that ended up being shared by other members of the remaining group of the Mongols. He brings with him his nephew, Chogyal Pakpa, who takes over his role at the court after Sakyapandita dies, which is a paragraph away, but I'm skipping ahead a little. Sakya tradition is famed for its conscientious observance of monasticism, existing side by side with distinct family lineage at its helm. So the leadership of the Sakya tradition is a family lineage that passes from one individual or generation to the nephew of a brother of the leader, as opposed to just from father to son. and for its thorough tradition of thorough education in classical Sutrayana topics as they had been taught in Indian Buddhist monasteries, following Sakyapatita's rigorous example. And so I've never seen anything conclusive, but it seems like this tradition of the Sakyas becomes gradually what's known as the as the Shadra curriculum that becomes common throughout all the schools of Tibetan Buddhism. These were conjoined with the practice of the profound tantric lineages of Vajrachakra, Sambhara, and Nikuya, Samaja, culminating in the Pith Instructions of Lamdre, Path, and Fruit, which were kept strictly secret till each disciple was prepared to receive them through the legacy of Sakyapandita and his nephew Chogyalpangpa in their relationship with the Mongolian Khans. Sakya Monastery would also become the seat of substantial political influence in Tibet for about a century, till the mid-14th century. So a long period of time, but they were the rulers of Tibet. And so when the head of the Sakyas and the Dalai Lama are together, they're almost of the same rank in the very hierarchical world of Tibetan Buddhism. The ranking is just slightly below, of the Sakya leaders, is slightly below the Dalai Lama. So I had a funny story, just to tell a little story. Khyentse Rinpoche, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, the amazing Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, was visiting Boulder, and Trungpa Rinpoche brought him up to what was then still called Rocky Mountain Dharma Center. And it happened that the Sakya Treason's brother, who was the father of the next Sakya Treason, was in the area somehow and visiting with, heard about this Khyentse Rinpoche going to be there. And I should back up. The Khyentses are Sakya incarnations. We know them as Nyingma, but they're really Sakya, which is another whole kettle of fish of like the Nyingmas take over all these tulkus of other traditions. They just abscond with them, and they did that with the Sakya. Jamye Khyentse Wangpo, Khyentse the Great, was a Sakya Lama. And so he, being nearby, was like, I have to meet my Lama. I'm going to come meet my Lama. Then he arrives early, and the room is set up with this very nice brocade on a big couch for Khyentse Rinpoche, and then a chair by the side with another brocade for him. And he comes in, and he immediately plops himself down on the main seat before Khyentse Rinpoche got there, because in his mind, he's the ranking individual in the room. So the staff had to gently encourage him to shift positions. Let's see. Through the legacy of Sakyapandita and his nephew Chogyalpangpa and the relationship with the Mongolian Khan, Sakya Monastery would also become, so this was where I was, paving the way for the type of priest-patron relationship that would protect Tibetan freedom for centuries in the face of its more politically powerful neighbors, referring to the Mongols and of course, to the Chinese. We include here, as well as excerpts from a commentary on porting from the four types of clinging by the 20th century Sakya master, Khenchen Ape Rinpoche, Nakwon Nyuten Zongpo. Khenchen Ape Rinpoche studied extensively in his youth, especially under the non-sectarian. So he was a Rinne master, Sakya master, Jamye Khyentse Chukyi Lodro, who was one of the incarnations of Khyentse Wangpo, Khyentse the Great. And he was the most famous incarnation, and by many schools was considered the most amazing Lama of the last generation of Tibetan Buddhism, in Tibet. And Dzongtsar Khyentse is an incarnation of Khyentse Lodro. And he became an especially highly respected abbot and teacher in Tibet before going into exile in Sikkim in 59 over the following decades. He helped to found and was a principal teacher first at Sakya College and later at the International Buddhist Academy in India and Nepal, respectively, spending about 5 years in meditation retreat in Parpang. In between, the passage included here in English translation consists of two very brief excerpts from transcripts of teachings he offered orally in Tibet to a gathering of hundreds of monks at the International Buddhist Academy in Kathmandu in '07. And he shares a classical lineage on several different types of meditation, including very important points on how to put the key topics of the Mahayana path into practice through analytical meditation, even long before one has achieved the full fruits of stabilizing meditation in shamatha. Thus, the teaching is based upon parting from the four types of clinging, serve as preparation for every other practice of the Mahayana Vajrayana. One knows how to look, one can find all the stages of the path to enlightenment right there in those 4 lines. If we can put them into practice through stabilizing meditation, analytical meditation, the realizations that ensue from fully comprehending these lines will make every subsequent Buddhist practice authentic. So first we have the actual text by Sachin Kunga Nimpo, Om Swasti Siddhi, homage. When the great Sakyapalama Sachin Kunga Nimpo was 12 years old, for 6 months he engaged in the practice of noble Manjugosha. Manjugosha is an epithet of Manjushri, meaning the youthful Manjushri, such that on one occasion he directed, and when they say the youthful Manjushri, it doesn't mean like Manjushri when he was young, or like the younger brother of Manjushri, Manjushri the younger. It means that Manjushri is always young, in the sense that primordial wisdom is always fresh, and every cognition is new or young. He perceives Manjugosha in the midst of an array of lights sitting upon a jeweled throne, orange color, displaying the excellent mutual teaching of Dharma, 2 bodhisattvas right and left. And the Lord, i.e. Manjugosha, speaks, if you cling to this life, you are not a Dharma practitioner. Pretty hardcore. If you cling to the 3 realms, that is not the spirit of emergence. Emergence being emergence from samsara, which consists of the 3 realms. So if for some reason you are focused on absorption meditation and achieving existence in the form or formless realms, you do not have the spirit of renunciation from samsara, but you're just looking to have a happy place within samsara. If you cling to your own concerns, i.e. if you focus on your own nirvana, as in the case of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, you are not a bodhisattva. When there is grasping, that is not the view. So if there's any type of grasping or clinging, that is not the view of the Dharma, of the middle way. By examining the meaning of this utterance, he recognized that all the practices of the path of the transcendences, which is Alan Wallace's translation of paramitas, are synthesized in the mind training of parting from the 4 types of clinging. We attain an extraordinary certainty with respect to all dharmas. Samaptam iti, which means something like it is as it appears. Something like that. I'm not sure about that. And then we had a very short commentary by Sakya Pandita. I bow at the feet of the sublime Guru upon having acquired a body with leisure and opportunity in general. And that's the general description of free and well, what we call often a free and well-favored birth, which we studied when we engage in the practice of Nundro. And we look at the 4 reminders: precious human birth. And a precious human birth means one endowed with leisure and opportunity, or free and well-favored. Freedom, being free and well-favored. And leisure doesn't mean like you can sit around in a leisure suit all day, or that you're fabulously wealthy, but leisure means that you have the freedom to practice the Dharma. You're not controlled by an oppressive government. You're not born in a time where there's no Buddha, where there's no Dharma, where there are no teachers, no access to the Dharma, and other similar conditions similar to that. And opportunity means you have your faculties complete. You're intelligent enough to understand the Dharma and to practice the Dharma. So free and well-favored are leisure and opportunity. Having encountered the precious teachings of the Buddha and having aroused an uncontrived, virtuous attitude, spontaneous, uncontrived, non-conceptual, heartfelt, not like something that you like think about in a calculating way. Oh, if I do this, if I give to this organization, I'll get recognition. Not that sort of attitude. One should engage in an unmistaken sublime dharma. So in that regard, one should practice parting from the four types of clinging. What are they? Not clinging to this life, not clinging to the three realms of samsara, not clinging to one's own concerns, and not clinging to phenomena and signs. Signs are not like signs from God or from deities, or like street signs or geographical signs, but signs means characteristics that phenomena have, characteristics by which we distinguish them, such as size, shape, color, and in the case of form, and various characteristics in the case of things like mental factors. There's a feeling tone that's different in anger from love. And by that feeling tone, we identify those as separate dharmas, as separate phenomena. And so not clinging to characteristics as if they indicate something that exists. To explain them, this life is like a water bubble. So the time of death is uncertain. Therefore, clinging to this life is not worth its price. It's a funny way of phrasing it. The three realms of samsara are like poisonous fruit, which is momentarily tasty but eventually inflicts harm. Like eating something that tastes really good, turns out it had turned bad, which didn't come through the taste, but by the next morning you are in enormous pain. Anyone who clings to them is fooled. Anyone that clings to the three realms of samsara has been fooled. If you cling to your own concerns, this is like letting an enemy take care of your child. Oh my God, that would be a mistake. Although it may seem to be fun for a while, eventually this will definitely hurt you. Thus, if you cling to your own concerns, while temporarily there is pleasure, eventually you will go to a miserable state of existence. If you cling tenaciously to things and signs, things being like the alternate translation of phenomena or dharma, this is like mistaking a mirage for water. The mirage of water for actual water, though it temporarily looks like water, when you come upon it, there is nothing to drink. Although this samsara appears to be a deluded mind, if it is examined with intelligence, there is nothing that can be determined as having any essential nature. Thus, by understanding that the mind does not enter into the past, nor does it enter into the future, and consciousness does not enter the present, you should come to know that all phenomena are free of elaborations. By so doing, you will not cling to this very life, and consequently will not be born in a miserable state of existence. By not clinging to the three realms of samsara, you will not be born in samsara. By not clinging to your own concerns, you will not take birth as a shravaka or pratyeka, but by not clinging to things or signs, you will swiftly achieve manifest perfect enlightenment. So four stages in sort of the attitude or range of motivation on the path that one might go through as one comes to understand the subtleties of the path and the options involved in the path. This unmistaken practical instruction, departing from the four types of clinging, is the view of the mind of the glorious great Sakyapa, Sachin Kundin Nimpo, and this completes the composition by Sakyapatita. The next text is the meditation guidance on the Mahayana, parting from the four types of clinging, from the Kenchanabe Nakwang Minten Zongpo, generating the mind of bodhicitta at the outset. So how do we frame this very short, succinct text, like 4 lines, into like a practice, similar to taking another scheme that's more common to us and saying, how do we like formulate this into a progression of practice? Anyone have any ideas on what Such an example of like a short little summary level text might be that's common in the tradition of the Kagyus. Cynthia.
The Four Dharmas of Gampopa.
You bet. The Four Dharmas of Gampopa is totally, very similar scheme, right? Grant your blessings in my mind, may follow the Dharma. Grant your blessings that Dharma may progress along the path. Grant your blessings path may clarify confusion, and grant your blessings so that confusion may dawn as wisdom. So, a different way of portraying the stages, but basically a very similar progression along the stages of view, aspiration, or motivation, path, practice, and result. So generating the mind of bodhicitta, they all said, please listen to this Dharma teaching by generating the mind of bodhicitta, thinking, I shall achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In order to do so, I shall listen to the Dharma. So this is, we might think, oh, this is, just sort of a rote way to begin a text. That must be just common stuff that they put in there. But you might also think, wow, I could approach this anytime I approach the Dharma. Anytime I go to a talk, listen to a podcast, listen to a talk, read a book, anytime that I approach the Dharma, we could say, I shall achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In order to do so, I shall listen to this Dharma or to the Dharma. And it's like us raising bodhicitta at the beginning. In the tradition of Trungpa Rinpoche, we often do the dedication at the end, which has a similar import, but we don't usually do that at the beginning, although in the Rinpoche we do that very short 2-line aspiration that includes bodhicitta and refuge. Those of you who are gathered here come from afar, out of great interest in and concern for the Dharma. I'm delighted that you have come at this time. The Dharma, I shall explain, is principally part of the 4 types of clinging. So this is a edited transcript of teaching, as we heard earlier. In general, there are 3 aspects of the Dharma: the collections of the teachings of the sutras spoken by the Bhagawan Buddha, the commentarial treatises on the enlightened view of the Buddha that were composed by the Panditas, the masters of India, and so on. So on is presumably includes Tibet and China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Burma, Bhutan, and maybe even the United States, who knows. And 3 of the Pith Instructions that arrange the order of the discourses within those teaching treatises on the path to achieve fortunate rebirths and liberation, explain how to practice principally for the sake of the beginner. So practical commentaries on those more scholarly discourses, those both by the Buddha and by the other teachers. There are, moreover, many Pith Instructions. Even in Tibet, there are many Pith Instructions on the Shravak-yana and the non-mantra and Mahayana among them. In Tibet, the 2 most renowned are parting from the 4 types of clinging granted by the noble Manchu Gosha, Sachin Kung and Igbo, and the mind training granted by Serlingpa, Dharmakirti of Suvarna Dwipa in Malaysia, to the glorious Lord Atisha. Parting from the 4 types of clinging was taught by the noble Manchu Gosha on the occasions where the greatness of Manchu Gosha is extolled in the sutra. There are also teachings such as the following. It said that if one utters the name of one Buddha, there is great merit. Even more so, if one utters the names of many Buddhas, one hardly needs to explain that there is yet greater merit. But it is said that if one utters the name of Manchu Gosha one time, there is greater merit than saying for an aeon as many names of Buddhas as there are. The stock phrase. What would the stock phrase in the West be? As many stars as there are in the sky, something like that, right? Grains of sand on the banks of the Ganges River. Such assertions are made because Manchu Gosha performs the same number of enlightened activities as those of all the Buddhas. And this is a common feature of the sutras and teachings that emulate the sutras, is that the focus upon the particular principal character of that sutra is said to be of more greater merit than anything else multiplied by great numbers, such as the grains of sand, etc.
So how many people
Is the
paused? How many people paused at that point in the reading to say the name?
well, you've been repeating it over and over and reading it, but yeah, that's a good point, Majika.
And like, why not just do it?
Yeah, yeah, the name of Majika. Good. He is the one who inspired many Buddhas, including our teacher. So the idea is that he's the one that inspired the Buddha Shakyamuni to undertake the path of a bodhisattva to become a Buddha. This was not in the lifetime that we read about that happened 2,500 some odd years ago in India. This lifetime happened many aeons ago, a long, long time ago, long rebirth, when the Buddha first generated the resolve to become a Buddha, to first generate the aspiration for supreme enlightenment and arouse them to follow the path. Because of this, so Manjugusha inspired many Buddhas, including ours. Because of this, Manjugusha is said to be the father of all the Buddhas. I wonder if that means he's related to Prajnaparamita, since she's the mother of all the Buddhas. It would be a perfect match. Another reason is this: the definitive Manjugosha is said to be the mind or wisdom of all the Buddhas, which is a sort of obscure reference to, in the Vajrayana, there's a way of understanding deities as having various levels of manifestation, or sort of there's levels of understanding deities. We can understand them as like the image that we see of that deity. So much usually orange, usually maybe white, 2 arms, 1 face, holding a sword, holding, in the other hand, holding, I think, a vase, looking sort of cool. So there's that Manjugosha or Manjushri, and then there's the ultimate deity, the ultimate Manjushri, and that is referred to here as the definitive Manjugosha. And the definitive Manjugosha is basically identical with the definitive Avalokiteshvara and the definitive Vajrapani and the definitive Chakrasamvara. The definitive deity is the ultimate empty luminosity, indivisible character or characteristic. So the definitive Manjugosha is said to be the mind or wisdom of all the Buddhas. For that reason as well, Manjugosha is called the father of all the Buddhas, the noble protector Maitreya. The next Buddha stated, even if many bodhisattvas on the 10th bhumi, like me, were to observe very carefully, we would not be able to fathom even the warrior's stance displayed by Manjugosha. Many such accounts of the magnificence of Manjugosha are presented in the sutras. The warrior's stance is a little bit of an odd phrase, presumably meaning the stance of a bodhisattva in the war against the defilements or the obstructions to enlightenment, as opposed to some other war. Shamatha and Vipassana, in the context of meditation, regarding meditation, there are 2, Shamatha Vipassana with cultivation of dhyana. So dhyana is the 5th paramita, dhyana paramita of meditation. And so it has at least two references. One is as the 5th paramita, and the other is that is the Sanskrit term, that is jhana, Jhana, in Pali refers more specifically to absorption meditation. So when we say the 4 formless absorptions, the term in Sanskrit is dhyana, the 4th dhyana. So with the cultivation of dhyana, so it's a little unclear. Are we talking about absorption here? We're talking about the paramita meditation so far. One achieves stillness in the mind. Specifically, if one achieves shamatha, taking that as one's basis, Whatever one cultivates, such as loving kindness, compassion, and so on, the mind will swiftly become accomplished in the training. So shamatha, the training in shamatha serves as an excellent foundation for any other cultivation of the mind in the Buddhist tradition, or in any tradition, any type of activity that one wants to pursue. Shamatha is an excellent foundation. And the attainments that are the fruition of each practice will emerge because of that foundation. Shamatha is indispensable as a basis for the higher paths, the three yanas. The higher paths meaning the paths of seeing, familiarity, or meditation, and normal training. However, those who lack shamatha may single-pointedly meditate on death and impermanence. So he's listing some of the main common topics of meditation. Cultivate loving kindness, compassion, and so on, probably meaning the remainder of what's known as the four measurable attitudes: sympathetic joy, rejoicing, and equanimity or equalness. If they meditate again and again, they gain clear realization of death and permanence, and loving kindness, compassion. They can gain clear realization of death and impermanence, and loving kindness and compassion, and so on, can arise. So even if you lack shamatha, you can still cultivate these meditative practice as shamatha practices. And when we read the text by John Control in the Treasury of Knowledge, he reveals that these practices are basically shamatha type practices. He specifically lists the contemplation on death and impermanence and for the measurable attitudes as shamatha practices. As for the methods of meditation, there are two: analytical meditation and stabilizing meditation. We've heard that before. For instance, if one cultivates shamatha, one needs to meditate repeatedly by focusing the mind on a single object without letting it disperse elsewhere. In that practice, there is no need for analysis. On the other hand, if one cultivates vipassana, or meditates on identitylessness, and the word "or" in the middle there, O-R, is a little bit dubious in my opinion. It's like if one cultivates vipassana such as by meditating on identitylessness, as opposed to these being sort of alternatives, since meditation on identitylessness is either equivalent to vipassana or one of the main types of vipassana. That way of meditating includes both analytical meditation and stabilizing meditation. For instance, in the case of identitylessness, upon reflecting upon one or many reasons for identitylessness, a reference to the 4 or 5 great reasons for emptiness in the Madhyamaka tradition. The single point of engagement with the reality that cuts through false superimpositions, i.e. projections, is called analytical meditation. For someone who has previously gained an ascertainment regarding those reasons and has also gained familiarization with the process of contemplating those reasons, then without thinking about the reasons for the mode of existence of identitylessness, it's a little bit clunky, as if identitylessness exists, the mode of existence of identitylessness. Simply focusing one's attention on that identitylessness is called stabilizing meditation. So basically, if you've practiced the contemplation of the reasonings for identitylessness, which is this translator's way of translating emptiness. So if you've done that practice sufficiently outside of meditation, let's say in contemplative practice, and you've experienced the result of, for example, not finding anything to meditate upon, then you can take that understanding, that experience of release of objective support into your meditation practice and just focus on the result of that process in your meditation in the manner of a stabilizing meditation as opposed to doing the analytical meditation. So Vipassana can have both stabilizing and analytical meditation. And for instance, if one meditatively cultivates compassion by first reflecting upon the reasons why compassion for all sentient beings is necessary, upon all sentient beings as their mothers, upon how much suffering there is, and so forth, this cultivation of compassion is analytical meditation. So he's now giving an example of an analytical shamatha type meditation. Without reflecting upon any such reasons, continually focusing one's mind on the thought, oh, with compassion for all sentient beings, what compassion I have for each one, is called stabilizing meditation. Recite phrases such as, may all sentient beings be free of suffering, the cause of suffering. Count on your rosary, recite them 100 times, and if you also bear them in mind 100 times, those phrases will be of benefit. Those are simply general examples. But basically, shamatha and vipassana both can be of the nature of either stabilizing or analytical meditation, even though it's more common to affiliate stabilizing with shamatha and analysis with vipassana. So I'll pause there and ask that you give me a moment. We had a problem with our air conditioning, and they had to replace the thermostat. It's not working properly, so I have to go adjust it. So I'll be right back. Hi. What did I miss? What have you been talking about?
We were all in deep samadhi.
Analytical or stabilizing?
I think we were more in the zoned out jhana stage, right?
So I've been speeding along and I didn't leave a whole lot of space for comment or
I have one
questions.
question about just that very last part,
Cynthia, yeah.
which is
Oh,
it seems like last week we were talking about, the different aspects of meditation, analytic meditation, and it's I was trying to recall whether what they're talking about here in terms of the analytic versus the stabilizing is similar a little bit to what we were talking about last week. Do you recall?
can you remind me what we talked about
Well,
last week?
it got into that we were using the term discursive, but in terms of it seemed like
Oh,
there's the process where you do the more uh, detailed, kind of point by point type of analytic meditation, which could be done either outside of meditation, as we've talked about, or in meditation. And then it's interesting how what they're describing is like having already done that, then it's more like you bring the result of that into your meditation. And that's the stabilizing one. So it seemed like there was a little similarity to what we talked about last week. And I just wondered if that's accurate. Um,
yeah, I think it's identical in that, let's see, we distinguished subtle discursiveness from, let's say, gross or coarse discursiveness. And so, coarse or gross discursiveness would be analytical meditation, and subtle discursiveness would be stabilizing meditation. That includes the factor of samprajanya or sheshan, of just like subtly noting, are you staying with the object of meditation, whether that's a non-conceptual object of the breath or an image, or whether that's a sort of conceptual understanding of emptiness. Acknowledging that until we experience the path of seeing, our understanding of emptiness is a conceptual understanding. And so when we meditate on emptiness in a stabilizing manner, we would still have a subtle discursiveness that keeps us on the experience of emptiness, however that is experienced, as, let's say, a not finding or a letting go, or some sense of understanding the indivisibility of emptiness and appearance, whether that's called appearance or luminosity or whatever. Does that sound reasonable?
yeah, yeah. I just felt like, yeah, the way that they articulated it seems sort of helpful in the, that basically in the stabilizing one, you don't have to go through all the detailed reasons or whatever, like they say in the middle of 81 here, that you've already done that. And so having done that, you simply um, focus on, I guess it's a tricky thing of what you're actually looking at in that case. But yeah, that's the kind of interesting part is what you're not looking at all the detailed reasons, and yet, as they say, you're looking at identitylessness. And as you say, you still have some conceptual mind left. You're not at the path of seeing yet here, but
Yeah, so you develop a conceptual image. This
right,
idea, we don't talk about it that much, but generally in certain other traditions, they talk much more explicitly about how basically we develop a conceptual image of emptiness in various ways as we go about the process of trying to understand emptiness. And, that's not because we're not trying to make it non conceptual, it's because we can't get at a non conceptual experience of emptiness until that path of seeing. And so that could be like sort of a gestalt, maybe, of like interdependence or dependent arising, or the interconnectedness of cause and effect, or dharmas, without the reification of any particular dharma, but more like because activity all happens in an interdependently originated way, therefore there are no entities that are originated. So this idea of like there being these three doors of emptiness, of liberation, of emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness. So wishlessness is like not wanting, that idea of like, well, there is nothing here, so my my sense of like searching for solace or searching for a refuge dissolves, and I experience a state of contentment. Or signlessness of like this sense that I have that I can distinguish so-called things by color, shape, size, of frequency of sound or tone of sound, and so forth. My immediate identification of phenomena by those characteristics falls apart. I realize that those signs don't indicate something that possesses those signs. The fact that I see different colors doesn't mean there are things that have those colors, that are of those colors. The edges of phenomena doesn't mean that phenomena are delineated by those edges. In the sense of like wholeness, like I look and I see a glass and I think that's one glass. All of it is the glass. And, we immediately have this experience of things being unitary. And personally, I find that one to be one of the most helpful contemplations of like looking at phenomena and our experience of very normal phenomena. And we all have the sense that this is a discrete thing. This is a coaster. And it has an edge that, the coaster ends at a certain point. Then there's air, whatever. And so we have the sense that coaster pervades this entire surface. It's all coaster from the center to the edges. It's all coaster. And that is instantaneous. Whenever we experience things, we pick up on the so-called signs or characteristics of shape, color, and we immediately identify objects out of what could be otherwise just an undifferentiated hodgepodge of colors and shapes. And like we all know examples of experiences where it's like you see colors and shapes, and at first you can't figure out what you're seeing. And then gradually things come into more clarity. There's more like delineation in the image. And you say, oh, that's a train, that's the wheel, and so forth. So we have that instantaneous that's built into our sensory systems. And so being able to experience that and know that just because that's happening doesn't mean that there's things that have those characteristics. So I don't know, something like that.
It's like we
What
can't.
is it to you?
It's like we can't unlearn how to read. Right? We see the written text and we know the word immediately.
Yeah, you can't not say it.
Right, in your mind. But there's no characteristic of that on anything.
And we've all seen these little illusions where they take words and they mix up the letters or even the words. And if you read it quickly, you read it as if it's not incorrect.
Right. They'll take
And
out the
sometimes
vowels. They'll take out the vowels and you can still read it.
any other ideas on like this whole, I mean, this is very important and obviously relevant issue of like, so how do we contemplate egolessness or emptiness outside of meditation And then how do we bring that into our meditation? And I think we tend, our tradition, we've sort of been trained to keep those actually very separate, and never really been trained specifically on like, okay, so we understand now, have some understanding of egolessness, however crude or subtle that may be. And so how do we bring that into our experience of our body, speech, and mind as we sit and breathe? How do we apply that? How do we feel that egolessness? We have analogies like Rinpoche's, Trungpa Rinpoche uses this idea of the portable stage set, developing this feeling of like watching yourself manifest meanness is I think one of the main ways that he gives us to work with this way of bringing egolessness into meditation. He also talks about, in that same seminar, which was the Vipassana seminar, now in the book Path is the Goal, he talks about me and mine, me and my emotions. There's like me, this innate sense of something's here, and then there's all the ways that we describe that me, the acquired sense of self. And so being aware of that, maybe we gap out for some reason during the day, or maybe we sleep really deeply, and like we wake up with a start, there's like a sound, and we're like, and immediately there's this sense like, I'm here. We may not know like even where we're here, like, back in the day, if you ever got really drunk and you pass out, and you wake up the next day, maybe somewhere unusual, there's that sense of waking up and like, oh, I'm alive. And then like, oh, where am I? And you have that process of like recreating the mind, the acquired sense of self. But that meanness is like instantaneous. It's there. And so how do we bring that into meditation? And sometimes it's taught that what you do in meditation is you just get to know those aspects of our ego really well, instead of like pretending like that we're able to experience egolessness either outside of meditation or in meditation, and like generating some sort of cloudiness or spaced outness. That actually in meditation it's helpful to just notice that sense of me. And we talk about being embarrassed or surprised or threatened, and how those bring out that guttural innate sense of meanness. It's like, oh, so that's it. We're being insulted. And so maybe that's our meditation, is by understanding that sense of me, we have a intuition of what it might be to be without that me, just by experiencing it viscerally. Cynthia.
Yeah, that's interesting, because in a way, um, what you're talking about is like, I mean, often what we do is focus on some specific actual thing that we're experiencing, and you know, and be able to work with understanding emptiness through that, something that's sort of tangible, as opposed to creating some kind of, what you were describing before, the sort of conceptual image of emptiness, which is some kind of, not really grounded in anything necessarily. So it's kind of interesting that sometimes just working with something that's more direct in our experience can be helpful.
Yeah, as being not empty. That's what the belief in existence feels like.
Right. I mean, so it's
There's a
like,
subtle clinging. I'm
it's
sorry.
subtle. Yeah.
There's a definite sense of like this clinging to being here.
Yeah.
I'm here.
And so just taking that as a starting point, as opposed to some kind of mentally constructed idea of emptiness, you can actually just take what it, we have this idea of, we know there's no self, but on the other hand, I'm sitting here and it certainly feels like being, right? And feels
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
so
And we've we've talked in a number of times about like how Trungpa Rinpoche doesn't actually present like how do you do analytical meditation or how do you meditate on emptiness. But he talks in many places about ego and egolessness and describes it. And I think if we understand that those talks are actually how do you meditate on emptiness, it really changes, like read them from that point of view, and it becomes very different and really feels like he's talking about how do we meditate on emptiness or egolessness. So there's one place in this book, Meditation, Mindfulness in Action, which has in it one of the 3 times he taught the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And in the preliminary talk, before he gets into mindfulness of body, he has a sort of general meditation talk where he says, what we should do in meditation is we should ask who's meditating. Who's doing this meditation? Who is the meditator? And that's identical to the Mahamudra investigations. And as far as I know, that's like the closest that he comes to describing that. Of like, where's the watcher? Where's the mind? Is it located? Does it have a shape, a color, a place, and so forth? And so that exercise in meditation, that's the Mahamudra version of analytical Vipassana. It's this very focused or simplified analysis of the sense of self as residing in our awareness. That we think we're our awareness ultimately. In a less constructed framework, we think our body is ourself. Somebody bumps you and you're like, oh, that's me. And we have a very strong affiliation with our body and with our emotions. But when we really think about it, it's like, those have all changed dramatically over time, my personality. But I'm still that same awareness that I was when I was a kid. That's me. And so looking at that, just, the very essence of what we consider to be self is the Mahamudra practice in doing that in various ways. So ideally in our meditation practice, we're able to have some sense of experiencing this type of Vipassana that's different than shamatha, like having a period where we'll settle and actually having the presence of mind and meditation to notice, like, are we not settled? And so I'm not going to try to look at the looker. I'm going to try to stabilize more. And then at a certain point, okay, I'm stabilized. Can I rouse whatever it is that I need to rouse to do that exercise of looking at the looker? Looking at the sense of self. So ideally in our own practice, day to day or periodically, instead of just like putting in your time, which is part of the process of just sort of holding the body and mind steady and letting it play out its momentum. That's a lot of what we do in meditation, is we're just letting the psychological process play itself out by not adding further energy to it. But periodically, ideally, we like have a stable experience and we're able to look. The sense of shamatha being stillness and Vipassana being looking. And it's described in a very simple framework. And then we look, and then we relax again. And ideally also you notice that when you do the looking, it becomes discursive. And so you notice, like, how discursive does it become? Is it just subtle discursive, like sort of a support to that exercise, that attempt? Or am I starting to float off into like, well, where is my looker? And details about it. Any other thoughts on this? So I circulated a little write-up on shamatha by Alan Wallace. from another book of his that's perhaps helpful if anybody hasn't already studied shamatha in detail through many, many years of such courses here. And ideally, we're able to identify the different aspects of shamatha, the obstacles of discursive, of agitation and drowsiness or sinking, and the antidotes of mindfulness and alertness that are the two antidotes to those experiences. There's some variation in the tradition. Sometimes they say mindfulness is the antidote to agitation, and alertness is the antidote to dullness or sinking. Sometimes they say mindfulness is the antidote to forgetting the object only, and alertness is the antidote to both agitation and sinking. And then they also describe the progression through the Cynthia, sorry.
Well, since you're talking about antidotes, when you were talking earlier about the, shamatha and vipassana, and there's a way in which those two are sort of antidotes to each other, for each other, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Aside from the 5 and the 8 and all of those, but there's that quality, like when you were talking about when you do a lot of looking, more of the analytic vipassana, then it can become discursive, and so then the response to that can be, okay, do a little bit of shamatha, uh,
right.
and vice versa. So there's a way in which those two, as a pair, antidote each other.
Yes, yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. If the looking gets triggers all sorts of thoughts about this, about the exercise, and then other things, and clearly you need to go back to shamatha for as the antidote to that. And if shamatha becomes like, traditionally the idea of shamatha, the deep pool of shamatha needs to be sort of disrupted, or needs to be used as the ground, which is a little bit mixing metaphors, how a pond can be the ground, but the basis, how's that? The basis for for vipassana, as opposed to just dwelling in the blissfulness of that deep pond of shamatha. And a lot of us, to the extent that we're able to experience, we do that. It's like such a relief to get out of the complexity and the chaos of our minds and our world. And actually, when our thinking discursiveness slows down, it's like, whoa, oh, this is good. And you say that and you've lost it. And then he goes through the traditional idea of us going through different phases with the object, of like having to focus on a discrete object, and then in the process of focusing on a discrete object, such as an image or the breath, he also talks about how we're focusing internally on a mental image when we do that. Often people think they're focusing on like a visual image. That visual experience is non-conceptual, so we think we're having a non-conceptual meditation, that's good, or like we're hearing the breath and that's a non-conceptual meditation, but really we're meditating on the conceptual image of that experience, which is necessary because it's continuous and unchanging, whereas reality constantly changes. It's impermanent. That's why it's real.
I enjoyed his instruction for looking at the mind by putting a thought out there, and then when it goes away, you're left with the mind. I thought that was pith. I thought that
That
was
was great. I hope other people caught that. In another book, he does that with a more concrete situation. He says, imagine an apple, like either like right in front of you or on top of your head, and you're visualizing an apple, or it could be obviously a circle or anything, a solid object. and you're visualizing that, you're focusing on that. So that's shamatha with object. And then, okay, take away the object, take away the apple. Focus on that same space. And so he does it in this version as like, what was it, a baby looking up at the sky and experiencing thought like bubbles. And that's like you're seeing these thought bubbles, and then you let go of the bubbles and you just look at that same space, and it's like you're looking at conscious space. In either case, it was the mind's experience of a mentally created object. And so then there's this sort of gap in the mind, in your mind space, and explore that space. That's shamatha on the nature of mind,
Yeah, I get a
which
similar reaction when I set up a watcher.
did you hear me? Could you say that again, Rob?
Uh, I get a similar kind of experience when I set up the watchers. When I put them here, and then they're like, it's kind of like letting that thought go. There's this sort of, it's like mind looking at mind, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's really interesting. It's very interesting.
It's short circuits the sort of subject object
Yeah,
framework that we're
yeah.
normally.
The first time it like I actually did it accidentally years ago. I sort of during a level 5, Shambhala level 5, we raised the gaze, and there all of a sudden the thought crossed my mind, what if this is looking back at me? And then I was like,
That's great. I love that you remember the instance when you
yeah, yeah.
first did
And
that.
then I was like, oh no, deer in the headlights, you know. That was my that was
That's
that
great.
was that's what it felt like.
Yeah, yeah.
So are you saying that because I've been doing a lot lately, like listening to the watcher and watching him, but sounds like you're saying you create the watcher as an object out in front of you. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's I'm just imagining that the space, like about 2 feet in front of my eyes, sees me back. So there's nothing to
Yeah.
create. It's just
Right.
No,
that
it's not like eyes or
no, it's
anything
just
else.
it's just that this is
Which would be the watcher.
yeah, but
But you're turning it into like a visual thing.
no, I'm not visualizing anything. I'm just imagining that my mental what's in my visual field sees me back, and I'm localizing it 2 feet in front of my eyeballs.
Yeah. That's like an out of body experience, which I had, I think it was like level 3 or 4. And Joe Mauricio, you know how he can kind of be comical. And he's like, okay, raise your gauge now and go out the window. And I actually went out the window. I was like, I went out of my body. I was like, wow.
That's great.
That sounds like Joe.
There's also this text that many of us have gone through together called Turning the Light Around, the Secret of the Golden Flower, where it's described as turning the light around. The mind's awareness as being like a light that generally shines outward. And like, what happens if we turn that light inward? Cynthia, last one, and then we'll close.
Okay, well, this is actually going back to when you were talking about the meditating on really on the conceptual image, not the external image, I think you were saying, and that this was necessary or important or whatever because the reality changes, but the image is continuous. Is that what you were saying? And because I was a little surprised. Is that I that
If you actually meditate like on the breath is moving all the time. And so
sure?
your mind is moving all the time. And so you don't actually experience the continuity of stillness, of one-pointedness,
Right.
because the object and your mind are constantly changing. Whereas if you make once you make the breath a conceptual object, there's a continuous quality to it because concepts don't erode necessarily.
Is that that was the part that I wasn't so sure about. Is that true?
That's how it's considered in the tradition. That concepts, they're unborn, so they don't
So
automatically.
we're not talking here about like the aspect thing, the idea that like instead of the app, I mean, you had been talking about, for example, an apple, and instead of the apple, it's the image of the apple. We're not talking about that
Right?
kind of
No,
aspect. You're just talking about a concept like the idea of the breath or
the
something like
concept of there being an apple in front of me, or the breath. Yeah. So the aspect is considered to be a specifically characterized phenomenon. To shift into the technical terminology of these two
okay, so
things.
we're not talking about that. That
That's right.
and so we're talking about more just a concept because you'd said a conceptual image of the experience. So that's why I thought you were talking about the aspect type of thing, but you're talking about more.
No. So all descriptions of meditation or shamatha that uses an object, not all of them. The ones that are like thorough and complete, they include the description of the image of the object turning into a mental image, like the focusing on the image of the Buddha is one of the most famous and common ones, although not to our tradition, but like throughout the Buddhist world and in many sutras, that's given as the sort of fundamental practice, is meditating on the image of the Buddha's form and using the support of an external image of a statue or a painting as a support for then internalizing that image and having that as the internal image that one is focused on in order to actually attain shamatha.
So that would also be like deity practice.
Exactly. Deity practice is a shamatha practice. So yes, visualizing a deity either externally or internally as oneself, it goes through that same process where initially you look at some image of that deity as a support, and then you concentrate or meditate on the internal experience, the experience of that deity.
And so is it always that process of going from an external to an internal object, or could you also just be creating an internal object, not
I
specifically?
think it always does. I mean, because any internal object we create has the
Comes.
source in some external experience, even if we don't literally use like an external support to start with. If we visualize a person or an object, it's based on those that we've experienced before. I'm ignoring the fact that everything is mind.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, we should close, and we'll go on next week to the world of Tsongkhapa. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the dense wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.